The last embers in the Gryffindor common room hearth pulsed a dying, orange glow, casting dancing shadows across antique tapestries and worn armchairs. Outside, the wind held its nightly dirge around the ancient castle towers, but inside, a different, more mechanical hum was beginning to resonate. Dusty Caldwell, or Dusty, as he preferred, hunched over a cluttered table tucked away behind a towering bookcase, his brow furrowed in concentration. The common room was utterly silent save for the wind and his own rhythmic breathing, punctuated by the soft click-clack of a miniature screwdriver against metal. Dusty, a third-year Gryffindor, was a figure of quiet intensity, often lost in thought, his usually untamed brown hair a permanent testament to his disregard for superficialities. Tonight, his focus was absolute, his gray eyes gleaming with a mixture of obsession and triumph. Spread before him was an arcane assemblage of Muggle ingenuity and pilfered magic, a portable cassette player, its plastic casing cracked and wired to a discarded crystal radio, a series of delicate copper coils, scavenged from a broken Muggle television set, and, most dangerously, several components he'd acquired through less-than-sanctioned means. A shimmering, iridescent beetle wing, borrowed from Professor Sprout's collection. A tiny, pulsating shard of what he suspected was a particularly strong focusing crystal from a faulty classroom telescope, disguised with a liberal coating of soot. And nestled amongst it all, a single, glowing rune-scribed pebble, surreptitiously liberated from a display in the charms classroom, its enchantment subtly amplifying the ambient magic of Hogwarts itself. He named it the Dimensional Resonator, a rather grand title for what looked, to the untrained eye, like a junk pile on the verge of spontaneous combustion. But to Dusty, it was a work of genius, a bridge between two worlds. He knew, with an unshakable certainty that bordered on obsession, that there was more to reality than what wizards or muggles understood. He'd heard it before Hogwarts, back in his muggle bedroom, tinkering with an old, broken ham radio he'd found in his grandfather's shed. Sometimes, late at night, when the atmospheric conditions were just right, it would pick up more than just static or faint jazz. It would pick up whispers. Distorted, guttural, wrong whispers, echoing from somewhere else. Magic, to Dusty, was merely an advanced form of physics, an undiscovered energy source that could be harnessed, directed, understood through a scientific lens. He scoffed internally at the woo-woo approach of most purebloods, content to wave a wand and chant, never questioning why it worked. He wasn't like them. He wanted answers. He wanted to prove his conviction that reality was a thin membrane, and on the other side, something vast and incomprehensible awaited. Just a little more, he muttered to himself, carefully soldering a thin wire connecting the cassette player's playback head to the beetle wing. The beetle wing, according to his hastily scribbled notes, acted as a kind of organic antenna, naturally attuned to subtle magical fluctuations, which he theorized mirrored dimensional energy. The rune-scribed pebble, carefully embedded in a clay housing, would serve as a constant magical amplifier, drawing on Hogwarts' ancient power, pushing the limits of what Muggle electronics could achieve. He leaned back, wiping a smear of grease from his cheek. The device, now largely assembled, pulsed faintly. A network of small, blinking LEDs, repurposed from an old Muggle calculator, cast a faint, emerald glow over his workspace. He double-checked his connections, his fingers nimble and precise. This wasn't about flashy spells or ancient incantations. This was about logic, circuits, and the undeniable resonance of fundamental forces. Dusty reached for a small, enchanted silver dial, filched from a dusty antique shop in Diagon Alley, and affixed it to the radio's tuning knob. He'd spent weeks figuring out how to adapt it, how to make the magical enchantment of the dial, intended for precision potion stirring, serve his purpose, fine-tuning dimensional frequencies. It was a crude application of charms principles, twisted and repurposed. With a deep breath, he flicked a small toggle switch he'd installed. A low hum filled the air, deeper than the wind outside, a sound that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. The LEDs brightened, cycling through a spectrum of greens and blues. The crystal radio speaker crackled, a normal, healthy static. Dusty slowly, carefully, turned the silver dial. The static began to change. It wasn't just white noise anymore. It deepened, gained a strange, hollow quality, like rushing water echoing in a cave. He felt a prickle on his skin, a sense of falling, even though he was perfectly still. The air grew colder and a faint, metallic tang filled his nostrils. It's working. His heart hammered against his ribs. He kept turning, minute adjustments, guided by a half-remembered principle from a charms textbook about harmonic resonance, combined with his understanding of radio wavelengths. The static began to coalesce, to form patterns. It wasn't sound, not truly, but a sort of pressure. A rhythmic thrumming like a vast, unseen heart beating just beyond the veil. Then, through the cacophony, a faint, ragged whisper. It was almost indecipherable, warped and stretched, but it was there. That same guttural resonance from his old ham radio. Not human, not animal. Alien. A thrill, pure and electric, shot through Dusty. He leaned in closer, his entire being focused on the speaker. He was hearing it. He was finally, actually hearing it. Proof. Absolute, undeniable proof that his theories weren't just the fanciful dreams of an isolated boy. He wasn't crazy. He was right. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though still maddeningly unclear. They sounded like a chorus of distorted voices, struggling to form words, or perhaps sounds that were never meant to be words. They were full of pain and a strange, cold anger. Yes, Dusty breathed, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. Yes! He reached for a notepad, eager to record the precise frequency, the exact magical resonance needed to maintain this fragile link. He was so engrossed, so utterly consumed by his discovery, that he didn't hear the soft creak of the common room door. He didn't notice the sudden flicker of the dying firelight, as if something invisible had just passed through. Caldwell? What in Merlin's name is that? The voice, cool and precise, cut through the strange dimensional din. Dusty jumped, his head snapping up. Standing silhouetted against the faint light from the corridor was Elara Vance, a fifth-year Ravenclaw, her arms crossed over her pristine robes. Her sharp, intelligent eyes, usually assessing ancient runes or complex arithmancy equations, were fixed on his chaotic workbench, narrowed in an expression of unmistakable disapproval. Her perfectly braided blonde hair, usually a symbol of her meticulous nature, seemed to bristle slightly in the strange, cold air now emanating from Dusty's contraption. Elara was known for her exceptional logical mind and her uncanny ability to materialize in places where she was least wanted, especially if those places contained forbidden or academically unsound activities. Dusty hadn't even realized she was still in the castle, let alone poking around the Gryffindor common room after hours. He felt a flush of annoyance, quickly followed by a pang of fear. He had been so careful, so secretive. Vance. Dusty stammered, scrambling to cover his device with an old, enchanted invisibility cloak, a pathetic attempt, given the audible dimensional thrumming still emanating from beneath it. What are you doing here? And how did you even get in? Elara scoffed, her gaze cutting through his flimsy cover-up. The fat lady is notoriously lax on late-night visitors from other houses, if you happen to know the correct, and frankly, obvious, password sequence she's been using for weeks. And as for what I'm doing here, I heard an anomaly. A very peculiar magical fluctuation that felt like someone was trying to tune a snorkel horn with a confundus charm. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the subtle, shimmering distortion in the air around his hidden device. That anomaly, I presume, is your project? The alien whispers, though muffled now by the cloak, still seeped into the common room. Elara's brow furrowed, her analytical mind clearly struggling to categorize the sound. It's nothing, Dusty said, trying to sound nonchalant, but his voice cracked slightly. Just some experimental Muggle radio frequencies. Elara raised a skeptical eyebrow. Muggle radio frequencies don't usually cause the common room tapestries to hum out of sync with their enchantments, Caldwell. And they certainly don't sound like that. She gestured vaguely towards the covered device, her face etched with a mixture of curiosity and growing apprehension. What precisely have you conjured beneath that cloak? And where did you acquire those components? Is that a charm's crystal I spy glinting from beneath the edge? The whispers pulsed, momentarily growing louder, a discordant chorus of suffering and something predatory. Elara's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine unease crossing her face. She hadn't just heard an anomaly, she'd heard it. And her expression made it clear she didn't like what it sounded like at all. Dusty swallowed, the triumph of his discovery suddenly overshadowed by the chilling realization that he was no longer alone in this. And Elara Vance, with her sharp mind and even sharper questions, wasn't just a witness. She was now part of whatever he had just unleashed. The Gryffindor common room, usually a hub of boisterous activity, was quiet save for the crackle of the fireplace and the rhythmic hum of Dusty Caldwell's device. The first tremor of a one-way connection had been established last night, a faint thrumming against the very fabric of reality that only Dusty, and now Elara Vance, seemed to perceive. Elara, a year above Dusty and perpetually armed with a look of academic scrutiny, had spent the night poring over his jumbled notes, her brow furrowed. So, she began, pushing her glasses up her nose. You're telling me this contraption somehow picked up signals from another dimension? Her tone was a blend of disbelief and an undeniable, scholarly intrigue. Dusty, still buzzing from the previous night's breakthrough, leaned over the workbench, his eyes gleaming. Not just picked up, Elara. It resonated. Like a tuning fork hitting the right frequency. The static from my old ham radio, the whispers, they weren't just atmospheric interference. They were a bleed-through. And this, he patted the collection of wires, salvaged Muggle circuitry, and gleaming runic copper plates, is just the beginning. Imagine the possibilities. A whole new frontier of discovery, beyond what any wizard has ever dreamed of with their wands and spells. Elara rolled her eyes, but a faint smile touched her lips. I imagine you'd get expelled, for starters. Tampering with dangerous, forbidden magic and Muggle electronics in a high-security magical castle is hardly textbook Ravenclaw behavior, Dusty. Necessity breeds innovation, Dusty retorted, already pulling out a fresh bundle of enchanted wiring he'd acquired from a forgotten storeroom. We need to amplify the signal, stabilize the resonance. I think if we modulate the magical energy flow through the resonance chambers, we can broaden the frequency spectrum. He gestured wildly at a complex array of shimmering crystals. Elara, however, was already consulting one of his circuit diagrams. Broadening the spectrum risks instability. What we need is focus. A tighter, more controlled energy burst. See here, she pointed with a slender finger, if you route the leyline energy through this crystallized argon matrix, rather than directly into the scalar coil, it creates a much cleaner harmonic signature. Less interference, stronger penetration. Dusty paused, his initial defensiveness quickly giving way to genuine curiosity. Crystallized argon, where did you even get that idea? Potions textbook, 3rd chapter on elemental transfiguration, Elara replied, not looking up. Argon is a noble gas, difficult to bond, but when successfully crystallized and imbued with a resonance charm, it can act as a powerful magical conduit, especially for, well, unusual frequencies. She paused, then added, you clearly missed that section. A slow smile spread across Dusty's face. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. You know, for a Ravenclaw, you're not half bad at thinking outside the box. Elara finally looked up, a wry smirk on her face. And for a Gryffindor, you're surprisingly open to actual data. Now, let's see if we can avoid blowing up the common room, shall we? Over the next few nights, under the cloak of darkness and the hushed whispers of the sleeping castle, their collaboration deepened. Dusty, with his intuitive understanding of Muggle electronics and a growing knack for repurposing magical components, worked tirelessly on the device's structure. Elara, with her vast theoretical knowledge of magic and an uncanny ability to spot flaws in Dusty's more impulsive designs, fine-tuned the energy flow and resonance patterns. The common room became their clandestine laboratory, littered with spell diagrams, disassembled radios, and flickering runes. The device itself grew more intricate. A central core of repurposed Muggle microchips, humming faintly, was now encased in a matrix of magically charged copper coils. Enchanted crystals pulsed with soft light, channeling ambient magic into a spinning vortex of energy within a modified oscilloscope. At its heart, where Dusty had once envisioned a simple antenna, now sat Elara's crystallized argon matrix, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. "Ready?" Dusty whispered one night, his hand hovering over a large, glowing switch. Adrenaline surged through him. This wasn't just about proving his theory anymore. It was about opening a door to the unknown, a genuine adventure that made even Quidditch feel mundane. Elara, her face pale in the device's light, nodded slowly. "As ready as we'll ever be. Remember, we're aiming for a stable, visual connection. No more whispers. No more cold spots. We need to see what's on the other side." Her voice, though firm, carried a hint of trepidation. Dusty took a deep breath and flipped the switch. The hum intensified, rising in pitch until it vibrated through the very floorboards. The crystals flared, casting stark shadows across the common room. Sparks jumped between the copper coils, not violent, but controlled, dancing arcs of energy. The central oscilloscope screen, previously displaying only static, began to warp and shimmer. A low, guttural growl, impossibly deep, seemed to resonate inside their chests, not just in the room. A pervasive cold seeped into the air, making their breath mist before their faces. Then, slowly, hesitantly, a visual began to coalesce on the screen. It wasn't flat, like a television. It was more like a window, shimmering and three-dimensional, as if the air itself was parting. Dusty gasped, his eyes wide. Elara clutched his arm, her knuckles white. Through the shimmering veil, they saw it, a world of perpetual twilight, choked by a thick, oppressive mist. Gaunt, twisted trees, devoid of leaves, clawed at a bruised, sickly sky. Their branches were tangled with a parasitic, vine-like growth that pulsed faintly with an unnatural bioluminescence. The ground was a decaying landscape, littered with strange, fungal growths that resembled petrified organs. The air itself seemed heavy, putrid, tasting of decay and ozone. A world where magic had curdled, where life had gone wrong. Merlin's beard, Elara breathed, her voice barely a whisper. It's corrupted." Dusty, though horrified, felt a strange, detached thrill. "It's real. My God, it's real." He fumbled for his enchanted quill and a notebook, desperate to record every detail. As he wrote, a sudden ripple passed through the shimmering gateway. The air in the common room dropped several degrees, and the low growl intensified, closer now, as if right behind the window. Out of the misty depths of the Upside Down, something moved. Small, shadowy forms, no larger than a house elf, darted through the gloom. They were indistinct, like blots of pure darkness, yet possessed a horrifying speed and agility. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, insect-like. One of them, faster than the rest, surged towards the gate. It wasn't meant to be solid, not yet. But the signal, enhanced and focused by their combined efforts, was stronger than Dusty had ever imagined. With a chilling screech that tore through the air, the creature ripped through the shimmering portal. It wasn't fully corporeal. It was like a living shadow, semi-transparent, but it was here. Its eyes, pinpricks of malevolent red, flickered towards them. It darted across the common room, a dark blur. A stack of Transfiguration textbooks tumbled from a nearby table with a loud clatter. A chill wind swept through the room, extinguishing several enchanted lamps. The air crackled with negative energy. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Elara shrieked, her earlier academic curiosity replaced by sheer terror. Dusty fumbled for the switch, his heart hammering against his ribs. Before he could reach it, the shadow creature, after causing a chair to scrape violently across the floor, seemed to flicker, its form dissolving rapidly. It let out a final, raspy whisper that seemed to echo inside their minds, a sound of pure malice, before vanishing completely, leaving behind only the lingering cold and the smell of ozone. The gateway on the oscilloscope screen flickered wildly, threatening to collapse. Dusty slammed his hand down on the switch, cutting the power. The common room plunged into relative darkness, save for the dying embers of the fireplace. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by their ragged breathing. What was that? Elara stammered, her voice trembling. Dusty could only shake his head, staring at the now inert device, his mind reeling. He had seen it. A creature from another dimension. And it had breached. Over the next few days, the incident gnawed at them. The creature hadn't returned, nor had the gate reopened. But a subtle shift had occurred throughout Hogwarts. Strange things began to happen, small at first, easily dismissed. Students swore they heard whispers in empty corridors, sounds that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Cold spots appeared without explanation, causing quills to freeze and ink bottles to shatter. Objects went missing from classrooms, only to reappear in bizarre locations. A potions ladle in the library, a history of magic textbook in the kitchens. Gryffindor Tower seemed particularly affected. The common room's enchanted lamps flickered erratically, sometimes casting unsettling shadows that stretched and warped in unsettling ways. The portraits grumbled, complaining of invisible hands prodding them. Peeves, ever present, was surprisingly quiet, his usual pranks seeming to be overshadowed by something far more sinister. Even the castle ghosts seemed agitated, their spectral forms shimmering with unease. One morning, a flock of owls in the Ollery went into a panicked frenzy, shrieking and flapping against their cages, apparently spooked by nothing. Filch blamed students for mischief, but even he seemed more bewildered than angry. Elara, who had initially been determined to stop Dusty, found herself reluctantly drawn into investigating the strange occurrences. She meticulously cross-referenced student complaints with castle history, looking for patterns, for magical residues. These aren't random, Dusty, she said, confronting him by the Black Lake one afternoon, her eyes dark with concern. The disturbances are concentrated. They're stronger near Gryffindor Tower, but they're spreading. And they're not like anything I've ever read about in any magical text. It's cold. Corrupting. It's like a sickness. Dusty looked around nervously. He'd tried to tell himself it was just a coincidence, that the momentary breach had nothing to do with the creeping unease. But Elara's logic was undeniable. The creature, even for its brief appearance, had left an indelible mark. Do you think it was scouting? Dusty asked, a lump forming in his throat. Elara didn't answer immediately. She was staring at the castle, specifically at Gryffindor Tower, which seemed to loom a little darker, a little more ominous than usual. I think, she finally said, her voice barely audible, that by opening that window, we didn't just glimpse another dimension. We showed them ours. A shiver ran down Dusty's spine. The thrill of discovery had been replaced by a sickening dread. He hadn't just proven a theory, he had invited something in. Something was watching them now, waiting. And he had a terrible feeling that it wouldn't be content with just a momentary breach this time. He just hadn't realized how powerful it truly was, or what it truly wanted. Not yet. The unsettling hum of Dusty's dimensional resonator, usually a comforting thrum of progress, now felt like a buzzing alarm bell in the Gryffindor common room. Since that first visual flicker, since the fleeting appearance of the shadow creatures in the periphery of their vision, the atmosphere in Hogwarts had subtly shifted. It wasn't just Dusty and Elara who felt it anymore. Whispers had started to circulate among the students. Not the usual gossip, but tales of inanimate objects shifting on their own, a chessboard piece skittering across the table, a teacup levitating an inch before crashing. Bookshelves in the library seemed to hum with an unholy static before volumes mysteriously tumbled to the floor. Lights in the corridors flickered with increasing frequency, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Filch swore he heard guttural growls emanating from empty hallways, and Mrs. Norris had taken to hissing at thin air, her fur bristling with unseen dread. For Dusty, the disturbances were far more personal, far more terrifying. The distant whispers from his old ham radio had been abstract, a curiosity. Now, the entity he'd inadvertently stirred was making itself known. It started with nightmares, not the usual fear of failing potions, but swirling vortexes of black mist, tendrils of smoke reaching out, a silent, all-encompassing dread that left him drenched in sweat, gasping for breath in the dark. Then came the waking hallucinations. A fleeting glimpse of a shadowy silhouette in the corner of his eye during transfiguration, dissolving when he turned. The scent of decay, sharp and acrid, in the middle of the great hall feast. And the whispers. They weren't from the device anymore. These were in his head, insidious and cold. "You opened the way," they hissed, slithering through his thoughts, twisting familiar voices into something monstrous. "Come closer," he confided in Elara, his voice a strained whisper as they huddled over his pulsating contraption late one night. "It's getting inside my head, Elara. I feel watched. Always watched." He ran a hand through his perpetually messy hair, his eyes darting to the shadowed corners of the common room. The fire in the hearth crackled, but the warmth seemed to fail him. Elara, ever the pragmatist, tapped a stylus against her chin. "The entity. It's a psychic connection. You're the anchor, Dusty, the one who built the bridge." Her gaze was sharp, analytical, but even she couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. "It's testing the gate, probing the weakest point. It wants you." The next few days were a blur of growing paranoia for Dusty. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony whenever he was alone, overwhelming his thoughts, drowning out logic. He started clutching his temples, his breathing shallow. During one particularly harrowing charms class, as Professor Flitwick demonstrated a tricky banishing charm, the world around Dusty seemed to warp. The light dimmed, the air grew thick and cold, and the familiar faces of his classmates elongated, their eyes becoming bottomless pits. He could see tendrils of dark mist snaking through the classroom, coiling around Professor Flitwick's wand arm. And then, a single, booming voice, not in his ears, but directly in his mind, deafening him to all else. "Gatekeeper, your world is mine." Dusty screamed. Not a controlled shout, but a raw, animalistic cry that tore from his throat, echoing through the stunned silence of the classroom. He collapsed, clutching his head, tears streaming down his face as the oppressive mental assault momentarily broke, leaving him gasping on the floor. "Mr. Caldwell." Professor Flitwick's voice was surprisingly calm, cutting through Dusty's terror. He rushed over, his small frame surprisingly quick, his wand already drawn. He didn't point it at Dusty, but rather swept it around the immediate vicinity, a subtle diagnostic charm leaving a faint, shimmering trail in the air. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you all right, my boy? Did you perhaps miscast a charm and feel a backlash?" No, Professor. It was inside." Dusty stammered, scrambling back onto his feet, his heart hammering. He looked around the room. Everything was normal again. The light, the faces, the warmth. Had it all been in his head? Elara, sitting 2 rows back, met his gaze with a look of profound understanding and grim concern. She knew. Later that week, Professor Flitwick called Dusty aside after class, an unusually serious expression on his normally cheerful face. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, steepling his tiny fingers on his desk, "I've noticed some peculiar magical fluctuations around the castle. Not dangerous, mind you, but certainly unusual. And your episode in Charms class, it was quite a powerful magical discharge you experienced, young man. Far beyond the scope of a mere miscast charm." Dusty swallowed, his palms sweating. He knew Flitwick was too smart, too perceptive. "I've been doing a bit of theoretical research myself," Flitwick continued, picking up a dusty, leather-bound tome titled, "A Compendium of Planar Enchantments and Dimensional Harmonics. Did you know, Mr. Caldwell, that our reality is not as singularly defined as most wizards believe? Ancient scholars, even some Muggle physicists, theorize the existence of parallel dimensions, realms beyond our own." Dusty's eyes widened. This was no coincidence. "The problem, of course," F.L. Flitwick went on, seemingly lost in thought, "is the nature of interdimensional travel. Or, more accurately, breaches. Our world, Mr. Caldwell, possesses a distinct magical resonance, a particular frequency that keeps it stable. Other dimensions, if they exist, would likely have their own, vastly different harmonics. Imagine striking two vastly different tuning forks together. The resultant dissonance could be catastrophic. He looked up, his sharp eyes pinning Dusty. Certain unapproved magical experiments could, hypothetically, create a localized energy signature that warps this reality. A sort of tear in the fabric of existence. Ancient texts speak of these planar gates or etheric rifts. They're inherently unstable. Like trying to hold back a flood with a sieve. Dusty felt a cold dread seep into his bones. Flitwick was describing his resonator, his gate, with unnerving accuracy, without ever mentioning technology. More concerning, Flitwick added, a frown creasing his brow, is the matter of influence. Any dimension that might possess inhabitants, well, such beings could exert a subtle, or not so subtle, psychic influence through a weakened planar boundary. Especially if they were drawn to the unique magical energies of our world, like moths to a flame. They might seek to anchor themselves to the individual who created the breach, using them as a conduit. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. You see, Mr. Caldwell, a gate doesn't just let things through. It also lets things in. Thoughts, emotions, malevolent intent. A weak gate is like an open wound, susceptible to infection. And the stronger the entity on the other side, the more powerful its mental and magical influence becomes, threatening to corrupt everything it touches. Dusty could feel the blood draining from his face. Flitwick wasn't just talking about theory. He was talking about him. And the Mind Flayer. There are old protection charms, of course, Flitwick said, almost casually, flipping a page in his tome. Complex wardings designed to stabilize dimensional boundaries, to deflect unwanted extraplanar influence. But they require an immense amount of focused magical energy, precise calculations, and, crucially, a complete understanding of the dimensional harmonics involved. A truly advanced form of defensive enchantment. He tapped the page. It speaks of resonance cancellation and etheric sealing arrays. Very advanced stuff. But the first step is recognizing the danger. As Dusty left Flitwick's office, his mind reeled. He rushed to find Elara, pulling her aside in a deserted corridor. He recounted every word, his voice low and urgent. He knows, Elara, Dusty whispered, fear palpable in his voice. He knows what we've done. Not exactly, but he understands the mechanics of it. He described my device perfectly, the gate, the influence. He even warned me about the entities. He called it a planar gate, an open wound. Elara's face was grim. And the psychic attacks on you, they're not just attempts to break through. They're tests. It's gauging the strength of our reality, the limits of the gate. Professor Flitwick effectively just gave us a masterclass in interdimensional warfare, without ever knowing he was doing it. She paced, her pragmatic mind working furiously. He mentioned wardings, protective enchantments, resonance cancellation. That's it, Dusty. We need to fortify the gate, stabilize it, and then seal it, just like he said. But how? He talked about immense magical energy, precise calculations. Dusty trailed off, looking helpless. The weight of his intellectual arrogance was crushing him. His science had opened this wound, and now he was utterly lost in the magical solutions. We combine it, Elara declared, her eyes alight with a sudden, fierce determination. Your technology created the gate, Dusty. My research and Flitwick's insights will help us understand its weaknesses and how to counter it. And the immense magical energy part, well, we're in Hogwarts, the most magically saturated place on Earth. We just need to channel it. A chilling gust of wind suddenly swept through the corridor, extinguishing a nearby torch with a sharp hiss. From the shadows at the end of the hall, a deep, guttural sound echoed, faint but undeniable, like a massive claw scraping against stone. It wasn't the distant, probing hiss from Dusty's mind, but something more physical, more present. The air grew thick and heavy, carrying the faint, metallic tang of something alien and rotten. Dusty and Elara exchanged a horrified look. The Mind Flayer wasn't just influencing Dusty anymore. It was getting closer. The gate wasn't just open. It was widening. And it was no longer satisfied with whispers. The crimson and gold banners of the Gryffindor common room fluttered with an unseen breeze, though all windows were sealed and the fire in the hearth had dwindled to anxious embers. The air, usually warm and comforting, now crackled with a frigid dread that gnawed at Dusty's bones. He clutched his magically enhanced mole tool, its tiny LEDs pulsing an urgent green, trying to quell the tremor in his hands. It's trying to come through, Dusty breathed, his gaze fixed on the shimmering, almost invisible ripple in the air directly opposite the portrait hole, the nascent gate. It pulsed with a faint, nauseating violet light, like a bruise on reality. Elara Vance, ever the picture of cool composure, despite the terror in her eyes, nodded grimly. Professor Flitwick's analysis was correct. It's no longer just a projection, it's an active attempt at ingress. The entity wants in. Her wand was already out, held steady, its tip glowing faintly. Professor Flitwick, standing a little straighter than usual, his small frame radiating a surprising resolve, tapped his own wand thoughtfully against his chin. Indeed, the magical resonance around the gate is escalating exponentially. It's using our own ambient magic, the very ley lines of Hogwarts, as a pathway. A parasitic infiltration. His gaze, usually twinkling with mischief, was now sharp and serious. We have, I believe, mere hours before a full breach is inevitable. Perhaps less. The protections I placed earlier are strained. Dusty felt a cold wave wash over him. Hours? They'd barely processed the full horror of the Mind Flayer's corrupted form, the way it had probed his mind, and now it was a race against oblivion. So, we fight it off. Or, seal it. Both, Elara said, her voice firm. We need to fortify this common room against a direct assault while simultaneously attempting to sever the dimensional connection from this side. Professor, what enchantments can we use to reinforce the space? Flitwick paced a short circuit, his thoughts clearly racing. The common room itself possesses inherent protective charms, particularly around the portrait hole, designed to prevent unwanted entry. But those are against our world's threats. Against a dimensional rupture. He paused. We need layers. Repulsion charms, density enchantments to make the very air an obstacle, and anti-teleportation wards, though I suspect its method of travel is different. He looked at Dusty. And your device, young Mr. Caldwell. Can it be reconfigured for a defensive purpose? Not just to reach across, but to push back. Dusty's mind, usually a chaotic storm of circuits and schematics, snapped into focus. Yes! The resonator creates a localized energy signature. If I invert the polarity and amplify the magical current, I could generate a counterfrequency. A dimensional static field, effectively. It wouldn't seal the gate permanently on its own, but it could destabilize its connection, making it harder for the entity to maintain physical presence. He looked at Flitwick. But I'd need a lot more magical power than I can siphon from the ambient energy. A direct, stable power source. Flitwick's eyes lit up. Ingenious. And for a power source, I might have just the thing. A relic stored deep in the Charms classroom's restricted cabinet. A focused magical conduit designed for high-energy spell matrices. It's meant for complex, long-duration enchantments, far beyond standard classroom fare. It will require precise calibration, however. Too much raw power channeled incorrectly could collapse the common room itself. Then we divide and conquer, Elara declared, already pulling parchment and a quill from her bag. Professor, you focus on the magical wards and getting that conduit. Dusty, adapt your device. I'll assist wherever I'm most needed, and I'll keep an eye on the stability of the gate, monitoring for any further incursions. As if on cue, a deep, guttural thrum resonated from the shimmering ripple in the air, sending a shiver through the very stones of the castle. The Gryffindor lions carved into the fireplace seemed to snarl silently, their stone eyes glowing faintly red. Dust motes danced erratically in the air, illuminated by the gate's sickly glow. Right, Dusty said, pushing aside his fear, time is not on our side. He scrambled back to his workbench, already sketching modifications to his resonator. He began dismantling parts, wires sparking as he rerouted connections, soldering with a practiced hand. He'd stolen enough spare wand cores and arcane crystals to know their properties intimately, and now he needed to integrate them flawlessly. Flitwick, meanwhile, moved with surprising speed and grace. He began tracing glowing runes in the air around the portrait hole, muttering incantations in a language Dusty couldn't understand, but whose power was palpable. The air thickened around the entrance, shimmering with protective energy. Then, with a decisive flick of his wand, Flitwick vanished with a pop, presumably to retrieve the conduit. Elara stood watch, her wand arm unwavering, her gaze scanning the common room. Dusty, Professor, remember the Mind Flayer's psychic abilities. It preys on fear, doubt, and seeks to create illusions. Stay focused. Do not let it into your minds. Her voice was a steadying anchor in the growing chaos. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Dusty worked frantically, his hands a blur of motion. He merged a finely polished dragon heartstring core into the heart of his resonator, wiring it to a series of enchanted focusing lenses. The device, once a haphazard collection of junk, was slowly transforming into something formidable, something hybrid. He felt the magical components thrumming under his touch, eager to be unleashed. Suddenly, the common room's familiar sounds twisted. The crackle of the dying fire sounded like whispers, the wind rattling the unseen windows morphed into distant screams. Shadows in the corners seemed to deepen and writhe. Dusty felt a cold, tendril-like thought brush against his mind, a sudden, overwhelming wave of hopelessness, of the futility of his efforts. You cannot stop what is coming. It is inevitable. Give in. He flinched, nearly dropping a delicate wiring. It's trying something, he gritted out, forcing the despair away. I feel it too, Elara replied, her voice strained. Her eyes were squeezed shut for a moment, then snapped open, hardened with resolve. Legilimen's counter-charm, she murmured, a soft glow enveloping her head. Focus, Dusty. Only the physical world matters right now. Just then, Flitwick reappeared, panting slightly, clutching a dark, ornate box. He opened it, revealing a magnificent crystal, pulsating with an internal, vibrant blue light, the magical conduit. It hummed with raw, contained power. This, Flitwick said, setting it carefully on a small table near Dusty's workbench, is the heart of our defense. Integrate it, Mr. Caldwell. But with extreme caution. It's volatile. Dusty felt a thrill of nervous excitement. This was it. He carefully connected the conduit to his resonator, feeling the surge of power immediately. The old Muggle circuits, magically enhanced, now hummed with a deep, resonant pitch, vibrating with controlled magical energy. The screen on his device, previously showing only static and numerical fluctuations, now displayed intricate, pulsing wave patterns, a symphony of intersecting magical and technological frequencies. As Dusty fine-tuned the resonator, Flitwick continued his enchantments, weaving complex protective spells around the common room. He layered ancient Gryffindor ward schematics onto the walls, their ghostly patterns glowing faintly before sinking into the stone. He conjured spectral guardians, lion-like figures that prowled the perimeter, their eyes following the gate's violent throbbing. Elara, meanwhile, didn't just stand idle. She drew a shimmering, invisible web of wards across the floor, sensitive to any dimensional intrusion. She then conjured several shimmering, translucent shields, positioning them strategically around the common room, creating a concentric barrier. Her logical mind was a perfect foil to Flitwick's esoteric knowledge and Dusty's improvisational genius. The very air in the common room grew heavy, charged with opposing energies. The frigid dread from the gate intensified, battling against the warmth of Flitwick's wards and the pulsating hum of Dusty's device. Outside, through the reinforced windows, the castle itself seemed to groan, the stone vibrating with an eerie resonance. The gate, no longer a mere ripple, now shimmered violently, a swirling vortex of shadow and sickly violet light. Tentacles, thin and shadowy, began to poke through, retracting quickly as Flitwick's repulsion charms flared. A guttural roar, not quite sound but an impact in their minds, shook the very foundations of the room. It's consolidating, Flitwick yelled, pushing more power into a glowing runic circle he'd drawn on the floor. It's testing our defenses, seeking a weak point. Dusty, his face slick with sweat, finished the last calibration. The resonator pulsed, its frequencies stabilizing into a powerful, rhythmic hum. Ready, he shouted, stepping back from the device. It's generating the counter frequency. If we activate it fully, it should start pushing back. Elara rushed to his side. "Professor, can your wards contain the feedback? If Dusty's device clashes too violently with the gate, it could destabilize both dimensions." "We must risk it," Flitwick declared, his voice tight. "The alternative is far worse. I have reinforced the structural integrity of the common room as best as possible, but the energies involved are astronomical. Stand ready, both of you. This will not be a gentle push." Dusty gripped the main activation lever of his resonator. The violet light from the gate intensified, and the air around it grew so cold that ice crystals began to form on the surrounding tapestries. A larger, more defined shadow mass began to press through the shimmering tier, resembling the clawed appendage of something vast and terrible. "Now, Dusty!" Elara yelled, her wand raised, poised to cast. With a deep breath and a surge of adrenaline, Dusty slammed the lever down. The resonator roared to life, a blinding flash of golden energy erupting from its core. The common room was bathed in a brilliant, counter-dimensional light as the opposing frequencies met. The Gryffindor common room became the nexus of a cosmic tug-of-war, teetering on the brink. The gate howled, a soundless scream of pure malevolence. The shadowy appendage, half through, recoiled violently, struggling against the sudden, overwhelming pressure. The common room shuddered, the stone groaning, and cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Dusty could feel the strain, the immense power threatening to rip his creation apart. The crystal conduit glowed with an alarming intensity, its blue light warring with the gold from the resonator. He gritted his teeth, pouring all his concentration into maintaining the energy flow, pushing back. But the entity was powerful. Even as the gate seemed to shrink and waver under the assault, a new wave of psychic dread washed over them, far stronger than before. It wasn't just fear. It was a vision, searing into Dusty's mind, an endless, decaying landscape, swirling with dark, storm-like clouds, and at its heart, a gargantuan, shadowy form, its tendrils reaching, grasping. He gasped, staggering back. It's still there. It's trying." Then, with a sickening crack, the gate pulsed one last, terrible time, and from its depths, something dark and sinuous, like a root made of shadow, shot through the shimmering veil, slamming into Elara's shield, which buckled precariously. The common room was plunged into an eerie half-light, the golden glow of the resonator flickering erratically. The Mind Flayer, sensing an opening, had begun its final, desperate push. And the Gryffindor Gate, despite all their efforts, was about to burst open. The Gryffindor common room was a fortress, yet it hummed with an unnatural silence that pressed down heavier than any siege. Dusty stood before his resonator, its arcane components glowing a furious green, a stark contrast to the shimmering blue of the various wards Flitwick had woven across every conceivable entry point. Elara, wand clutched tightly, paced the perimeter, her eyes sharp, scanning for any flicker of shadow, any ripple in the air. "The wards are holding, for now," Flitwick whispered, his voice uncharacteristically gravelly, "but I can feel its intent. It's probing, looking for a weakness. This is beyond anything I've ever encountered in theoretical dimensional enchanting." He adjusted his spectacles, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple despite the cool air. Dusty nodded, his gaze fixed on the array of dials and glowing tubes. His device, born of scavenged Muggle electronics and purloined magical artifacts, thrummed with raw, barely contained energy. It was a beacon, but also their only hope. "It's like it's trying to find the resonant frequency of our reality, Professor, to hum itself into existence." A low groan vibrated through the stone walls, not of the castle settling, but of something immense straining against an invisible barrier. The common room lights flickered violently, plunging the space into near darkness before sputtering back to life. On the wall opposite the portrait hole, where Dusty's device was pointed, a vast, murky shadow began to coalesce. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was a hungry darkness, a tear in the fabric of existence that pulsed with malevolent energy. "It's here," Elara breathed, her face pale but determined. "It's pushing through." Tendrils, inky black and impossibly thin, stretched from the coalescing shadow, feeling their way across the stone. They didn't touch. They seemed to absorb the light around them, leaving trails of deeper darkness. Dusty's device whined, the gauges spiking into the red. "Now, Dustin," Flitwick yelled, wand raised. "On my mark." The shadow expanded rapidly, forming a gaping maw that resembled a colossal, decaying flower, its petals writhing with a corrupted, fungal life. A wave of pure dread washed over them, a psychic assault that made Dusty's teeth ache and Elara stumble. Whispers, ancient and venomous, flooded their minds, telling them of futility, of decay, of an inevitable surrender. "Dustin," the whispers, Elara gasped, clutching her head. Dusty fought through the mental static, anchoring himself to the cold reality of the metal beneath his fingers. He remembered the distorted radio signals, the fascination, the burning desire to know. This wasn't fascination anymore, it was survival. "Professor, Elara, focus your energy on the central point of the gate. I need a pure, concentrated burst to amplify the counter-frequency," Dusty commanded, his voice surprisingly steady. He had practiced this, visualized it, but the reality was infinitely more terrifying. Flitwick didn't hesitate. "Right? Protego horribilis. Then bombarda maxima." He unleashed a shield charm, shimmering violet, directly at the encroaching maw, then followed it with a powerful, explosive blast of pure magical energy. The spell detonated against the shadowy opening, causing it to momentarily recoil with a silent shriek that echoed in their minds. "My turn." Elara pointed her wand. "Confringo." Her curse, sharp and precise, struck just above Flitwick's impact point, creating another ripple of distress in the dark manifestation. "It's weakening the edges, Dusty." "Good." Dusty slammed his hand down on a large, red lever on his device. The resonator roared to life, a high-pitched whine that cut through the psychic whispers like a knife. He flicked a series of switches, his fingers flying across the controls. "Professor, I need you to channel that dimensional magic we discussed, the harmonic resonance. Direct it into the core of the device." Flitwick, seeing the logic, quickly adjusted his stance. Harmonic resonance, a dangerous gambit, Dustin, but necessary. He began chanting in a language Dusty didn't understand, his wand glowing with an ethereal, pulsing light. A stream of raw magical energy, shimmering gold, poured from his wand tip directly into a specially modified port on Dusty's device. The resonator surged, the green lights turning a blinding emerald. The air crackled with power and the scent of ozone filled the room. Dusty felt the sheer force of Flitwick's magic, an almost overwhelming sensation, but he focused, channeling it, shaping it. He was merging two worlds, science and magic, into a weapon. The Mind Flayer, sensing their intentions, intensified its assault. The shadowy maw opened wider, and from its depths emerged spectral forms, half-glimpsed horrors that twisted and writhed, their silent screams tearing at their sanity. Illusions flickered, dusty old memories, worst fears, loved ones corrupted and grotesque. Dusty saw a twisted version of his parents, their faces decaying, whispering about his silly little inventions. Elara saw herself failing, cast out of Ravenclaw alone. Flitwick saw ancient, forgotten spells turning against him. "It's a mind game, Dustin. Don't look." Elara yelled, her voice strained, blasting a particularly horrifying apparition into non-existence with a reducto spell. "Focus on the physical gateway." Dusty grit his teeth, forcing his gaze back to his controls. His hands trembled, but he knew this was it. He had to trust his instincts, trust the knowledge he'd painstakingly gathered, and trust the magic his friends were pouring into his creation. "Now!" Dusty roared, slamming his fist onto a final, large button labeled Dimensional Overcharge. The resonator shrieked, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. The golden magical energy from Flitwick, amplified and modulated by Dusty's tech, pulsed outward in a blinding emerald wave. It struck the shadowy gate, not with an explosive force, but with a pure, concentrated vibrational frequency. The Mind Flayer's manifestation shuddered. The writhing tendrils recoiled, dissolving into nothingness. The vast, hungry maw began to contract, a guttural, mental scream echoing through their minds, a shriek of pure, unadulterated pain and fury that threatened to shatter their eardrums. "It's working," Elara yelled, staggering back from the force of the energy surge. But the entity wasn't beaten yet. With a final, desperate surge of power, it tried to lash out, projecting a concentrated beam of psychic energy directly at Dusty. He felt a searing pain behind his eyes, a sensation of his very mind being compressed, crushed. He was vaguely aware of his knees buckling, but he refused to fall. He had come too far. He had friends now and a purpose beyond mere curiosity. He remembered the early whispers, the ham radio, the nagging feeling that there was more to reality. He'd wanted to prove himself, to bring science to magic. Now he was letting magic bring power to his science, and it was working. He looked at Flitwick, pouring his arcane knowledge into the device, and at Elara, deflecting mind-shattering illusions with courageous defiance. He wasn't alone. With a surge of newfound strength, he pushed back against the psychic assault, drawing on a raw, defiant energy that wasn't scientific or magical, but purely human. He channeled it into the device, pouring every ounce of his will into the counter-frequency. The emerald wave intensified, hitting the contracting gate with renewed force. The shadowy tendrils dissolved completely, and the vast maw twisted inward upon itself, becoming smaller, darker, less defined. The psychic screams of the Mind Flayer became fainter, fading into frustrated, impotent whispers. Finally, with a sound like a tearing canvas followed by the sharp crack of a closing vault door, the shadow vanished entirely. The glowing emerald energy subsided, and the Gryffindor common room lights stopped flickering, returning to their steady, warm glow. The overwhelming dread lifted, replaced by a stunned, exhilarating silence. Dusty slumped against his device, breathing heavily, his entire body trembling. The pain in his head slowly receded, leaving behind a dull ache. Elara rushed to him, steadying him. Flitwick, looking utterly drained, sank onto the nearest armchair, his wand clattering to the floor. We did it," Elara whispered, disbelief and relief warring in her voice. "We sealed it." Dusty could only nod, a wide, weary grin spreading across his face. He looked at his device, now dormant, then at Elara and Flitwick. He hadn't done it alone. He couldn't have. "The Gryffindor Gate is sealed," Flitwick rasped, wiping sweat from his brow. "You did it, Dustin. You truly bridged the impossible." He gave Dusty a look of profound respect, no longer just a teacher to a student, but one innovator to another. But be warned, a connection once forged, even severed, leaves a scar. And some scars, they itch. Dusty felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lingering cold in the common room. He had stared into the abyss and pushed it back, but a part of him knew Flitwick was right. The whispers might be gone for now, but the knowledge, the possibility of what lay beyond, was now etched into his very soul. And as he looked at the now silent common room, he wondered what other dimensions, what other horrors, or perhaps wonders, were still out there, just waiting for another signal to call to them. The Gryffindor Gate might be sealed, but Dusty Caldwell's journey into the unknown had only just begun.